The HOA thought they could walk all over a quiet rancher by running a pipeline straight through his land. But what they didn't know, he held the one thing they couldn't live without, their water supply. This is the story of how Ethan Carter turned the tables on an entire HOA, and won. The quiet ranch life. The Carter Ranch had been standing for 3 generations. Rolling fields stretched out beneath the wide-open sky, dotted with cattle that grazed in peace. Every morning, Ethan Carter rose before the sun, sipping his coffee on the porch as he listened to the creek's steady gurgle nearby. That sound was more than water, it was reassurance. The land was alive, and so was the family legacy he'd sworn to protect. Ethan wasn't a wealthy man. He wasn't flashy either. His strength came from quiet persistence, long days of work, and a stubborn belief that you don't turn your back on your roots. He knew every fence post, every corner of the property. His father had once told him, "This land is your shield and your responsibility. Treat it like family, and it will take care of you." For years, life moved in harmony, until the day he spotted orange flags staked into his pasture. At first, Ethan thought some lost hikers had left them behind. But the next day, more appeared. Straight lines cut through his grazing fields, stretching toward the horizon. He frowned. Something wasn't right. A week later, the rumble of trucks confirmed his fears. Surveyors in bright vests marched across his land, taking notes, snapping photos, and speaking with the detached tone of people who believed they belonged there. Ethan walked up to them, boots crunching against the dry grass. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he asked, calm but firm. One of the men looked up, clipboard in hand. "Just preliminary assessments, sir." "HOA project." "HOA," Ethan repeated. His brow furrowed. "This is private property. You're standing on my ranch." The man barely looked bothered. "We've got authorization. You'll be contacted." And just like that, they kept working, as if his voice carried no weight. Ethan's gut sank. Something much larger was creeping into his world, and it wasn't going to leave quietly. The pipeline invasion. 2 weeks later, Ethan met Richard Hale. Richard was everything Ethan wasn't. Sharp suit, polished shoes, a car so shiny it seemed untouched by dust. He carried himself like a man who never lost an argument. He arrived with a wide grin and a folder of papers. "Mr. Carter," Richard said warmly, stepping out of his vehicle. "I'm Richard Hale, president of the Homeowners Association for Oak Ridge Estates. Beautiful land you've got here." Ethan stood still, arms crossed. "Cut to the point." Richard chuckled. "Fair enough. The community is expanding, and we're building a water pipeline to serve our residents. Your ranch happens to sit on the most convenient route. We're offering fair compensation for the easement. Think of it as progress." Ethan shook his head. "Not interested. My land isn't for sale, and it's not for carving up either." Richard's smile tightened, but he didn't flinch. "I understand your attachment. But you can't stop this. The board has lawyers' approvals, it's already in motion. Refusing won't do much except delay the inevitable." With that, Richard left a stack of contracts on Ethan's porch. Within days, heavy machinery rolled in. Bulldozers tore into the pasture, scaring the cattle. Trenches scarred the soil. Ethan stood helpless, shouting himself hoarse, only to be waved off by men with clipboards repeating phrases like, "eminent domain" and "community necessity." Neighbors from Oak Ridge Estates drove by in their luxury cars, barely glancing at the mess. To them, Ethan was an obstacle, not a man. Inside, Ethan seethed. Every scar on his land felt like a wound on his own skin. But instead of fighting blindly, he began to watch, listen, and collect information. If they thought they'd crushed him, they hadn't seen his resolve. The discovery. Ethan spent late nights poring over maps and property records. If the HOA was building a pipeline, where did their water actually come from? Surely not the city. They were too far out. One evening, while flipping through county documents at the dusty records office, Ethan found it. Oak Ridge Estates pipeline connected directly to a natural spring. A single source. No backup supply, no secondary line. Ethan leaned back in his chair, stunned. He knew that spring. It was small, tucked away in a neglected patch of land about 5 miles east. He remembered fishing near it as a boy. And the deed? owned by an out-of-state investor who hadn't stepped foot in the county in over a decade. Even better, the property had recently been listed quietly for sale. For the first time in weeks, Ethan smiled. They had stolen his peace, his land's dignity, and treated him like he was powerless. But they had built their empire on something fragile. Something he could hold in his hands. "Looks like the spring's about to change ownership," Ethan muttered, his voice steady with purpose. The turning point. The purchase went through without a hitch. Ethan didn't make noise about it. He wanted the HOA comfortable, overconfident. He went about his ranch work as usual, watching trucks finish the last sections of pipeline across his pasture. Meanwhile, Oak Ridge residents enjoyed their fountains, pristine lawns, and golf course sprinklers, blissfully unaware that their luxury depended on one man's quiet signature on a deed. Then on a bright morning, the water slowed to a trickle. Faucets hissed. Showers sputtered. Sprinklers sprayed nothing but air. Within a day, fountains stood dry, and lawns began to brown under the summer sun. Panic spread quickly. HOA board meetings turned chaotic. Residents demanded answers. Richard Hale, once calm and smug, now sweated through his suits as he promised solutions he couldn't deliver. Finally, the truth reached him. The spring now belonged to Ethan Carter. When Richard drove back to the ranch, his tone was very different. He found Ethan repairing a fence post, as if nothing unusual was happening. "Mr. Carter," Richard began, voice strained. "We need to discuss an arrangement." Ethan looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. "Now you want to talk?" The final word. The meeting between Ethan and the HOA board was held at his ranch, not in their polished conference room. The shift of power was clear. Richard, once smug and dismissive, now leaned forward, his voice almost pleading. "The community is desperate. We'll pay double, triple for water access. Just name your price." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "This was never about money. You tore through my land without permission. You treated me like I didn't matter. That ends today." The board sat in uneasy silence. Ethan laid down his terms. The HOA would pay for every inch of damage done to his ranch. The pipeline would be rerouted away from his land. And most importantly, they would never again force decisions on him or any neighbor without consent. If they refused, the taps would stay dry. Richard swallowed hard, realizing Ethan had won. Not through lawyers, not through wealth, but through patience, persistence, and the simple truth that water flows where its owner allows. Months later, Ethan's ranch returned to peace. The scars healed. The creek sang again. And the spring? It flowed under his watchful care, not as a weapon, but as a reminder. You can't trample over someone's dignity and expect to prosper. The HOA had learned the hard way that integrity outlasts arrogance. And Ethan, once the quiet rancher in the shadows, became the man who turned the tables on an empire.